Director, and the Governor has designated me to chair today's meeting. Also joining me are other members of the New York City Financial Control Board, including Mayor Bill de Blasio, Controller Tom DiNapoli, City Controller Scott Stringer, and then the appointed members Steve Cohen and Secretary of State Rosanna Rosado. So I'd like to note also that we have Mark Wurzel, observer for the City Council, Minority Leader, and Matthew Harnish, also observer for the Speaker of the Assembly, are to be observing today. I'll now entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the last annual board meeting that was held on August 6th, 2020. Thank you. These minutes have previously been distributed. We have a motion from Controller Tom DiNapoli. Second motion. That motion is approved. The minutes are now approved. The next item on the agenda is the financial plan for 2022 to 2025. And Mr. Mayor, I understand that you will present the city's four-year financial plan. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair Mahika. And as we were just talking a moment ago, it is a much better meeting we get to have in 2021 than the one we had in 2020. We've come a long, long way together. I want to thank everyone. Special thanks to Controller Tom DiNapoli, Controller Scott Stringer, and of course to the members of the board, Secretary of State Rosanna Rosado, Steve Cohen, and Bill Thompson. Thank you all. We have, during this whole period of extraordinary challenge, and it's just nothing to compare historically to what we've all been through together with COVID. But there has been a really strong atmosphere of partnership, and that extends to the City Council. I want to thank the City Council for their partnership throughout this process and their focus on fiscal responsibility and reserves, which I'll talk about in a moment. And thanks to the folks on my team who saw us through doing the hard work every day, First Deputy Mayor Dean Fullahan and Budget Director Jacques Jiha. For our budget, the fiscal year 22 adopted recovery budget is $98.7 billion. It is a budget entirely focused on what it's going to take to bring this city back fully, to bring back the lives of our people, jobs, livelihoods, revenue for our city, all of the above. It is balanced and fiscally responsible with manageable out-year gaps. The recovery budget makes strategic use of almost $6 billion in federal direct aid and $7 billion in education aid to jumpstart New York City's economic comeback and build a recovery for all of us. The stimulus, to say the least, has been a game changer, and I want to express personally, and we all feel this, tremendous gratitude to President Biden and his administration and our partners in Congress, Leader Schumer, Speaker Pelosi, and the entire Congress for what they did for this city. We survived the worst of the COVID era until the stimulus was available because we had prepared long in advance for any potential type of downturn, even though we could not have possibly imagined the one we got. We were ready, and this comes to the topic of reserves. Before the pandemic, we had a record level of $6 billion in combined reserves, more than 3 times higher than what the prior administration had left when I came into office. We took a number of actions to build our reserves, and thanks to these actions, when the pandemic hit, we were able to avoid layoffs and avoid major cuts to critical programs and services. It became obviously a priority to restock the reserves rapidly, and so in the recovery budget, we replenished the reserves, adding $2.8 billion since June of last year, 2020, including $1.6 billion to the Retiree Health Benefits Trust Fund, and in partnership with the City Council, $500 million to the city's first ever rainy day fund. Total reserves in fiscal year 22 are now $5.1 billion, so less than $1 billion lower than our all-time high, and absolutely believe the City of New York will continue to add to those reserves going forward. Now let's talk about the savings efforts that we've undertaken, and particularly our focus on headcount. On top of building and maintaining reserves, we've remained committed to reducing headcount and achieving savings. Through strict headcount and attrition management, we reduced agency employee headcount to 313,000. This is a cut of 14,000 from the peak headcount that we reached less than 2 years ago. The recovery budget achieves nearly $4 billion in savings over the 2-year savings program, second highest total of this administration. And then on top of gap closing savings, we recently announced something very, very important. We announced that our retirees are moving to the NYC Medicare Advantage Plus plan in January. This was something we obviously achieved with our partners in labor. This means our hardworking former employees will have better health care options, and the city's long-term liability for retiree health costs will be significantly reduced. So this is truly a win-win. As to revenue, during the pandemic, careful, cautious forecasts ensured that we were able to react swiftly and responsibly as the economy rapidly declined. Your reports show significant revenue increases in fiscal year 22 over our current forecast and smaller upsides in the out years, and I certainly do appreciate your confidence in the recovery. And although it's a matter of approach and strategy always in the City of New York to remain cautious and careful in our estimates, I certainly share your optimism that things are moving in the right direction and there's a positive outlook for revenue. As to bond ratings, fiscal monitors agree that our financial strategies are working. Moody's and S&P recently upgraded our credit outlook to stable. Last month, Kroll Bond Rating Agency rated the city for the first time, giving us AA+ rating and a stable outlook. In terms of employment, we've recovered almost half of the jobs lost during the pandemic, adding 145,000 jobs since December alone. By the end of the year, our estimate is we should achieve 4.5 million jobs, actually higher than when I first took office, and then a return to the pre-pandemic level of 4.7 million total jobs in the city within 2 years. And the impact on recovery in this budget. Our economic recovery will be built, of course, on beating COVID and investing in a recovery that reaches all New Yorkers. We could not have tackled COVID without a very strong public health system, and that system has now administered over 10 million doses of the vaccine in the 5 boroughs. The recovery budget makes additional investments in public health and in the future of the city's efforts on public health and around jobs that will be created in the health sector, including the LifeSci NYC initiative that will establish New York City as the public health capital of the world. The recovery budget is also making investments in public safety by fighting gun violence with the expansion of Cure Violence in the crisis management system, support for the NYPD's crime reduction efforts, and then beyond the issue of safety on quality of life, cleaning up our city with the City Cleanup Corps, helping small businesses to come back with a variety of loans and grants, and bringing our tourists back with a massive national and international advertising campaign. As the city reopens, opportunity will return and obviously revenue as well. We're also investing in our children. What has become clear in this crisis is that nothing has been more important to New Yorkers than the needs of our children, and nothing signals recovery more than the strength of our schools. We invested in our children this summer with Summer Rising, first ever free, absolutely universal, full-day summer program, and this is something I hope will be continued in the future because it's been tremendously successful for 200,000 kids. And this fall, students will be supported by a new universal academic recovery plan so we can close that COVID achievement gap that emerged when kids were not in school and address their emotional needs as well. To conclude, I'm proud to say that the recovery budget is balanced and out-year gaps are manageable and within historic norms. And by remaining committed to strong fiscal management and restoring reserves to near record levels, we will have a stronger and even more resilient city going forward. As always, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. This will be my last appearance. It's been good, and thank you, everyone. And thank you all for the important work you do for the people of New York City and New York State.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And before we go to Comptroller DiNapoli, I just want to recognize Board Member Bill Thompson. I did not mention that he was with us here today. With that, Comptroller DiNapoli, do you have any comments on the Mayor's financial plan?
I do. Thank you, Robert, very much. And thank you, Mayor de Blasio, for your report once again to this board. And my appreciation to our colleagues on the board and the Control Board staff for all of your efforts. I'd like to offer some brief observations on behalf of the New York City office, of the Office of State Controller. This report was prepared by our team there, headed by Rahul Jain, who's our Deputy Controller for the New York City office, and he joins me here. A detailed report is available online, as we do things these days. To echo some of what the mayor said, much has changed since the last time we met. An immediate and painful impact on city revenues and the expectations for an acute fiscal crisis was mitigated in the short term by federal grants, a restoration and expansion of state aid, and higher than projected personal income and corporate tax revenue. I recognize the mayor's efforts at managing through this period of recovery using essential federal relief secured by the Biden administration and our New York State congressional delegation. Long-term questions are now the focus for economic and budgetary recovery. The economic recovery will take years and is likely to remain uneven. Unemployment in the city has clung above double digits. More than 530,000 remain out of work. With federal expanded unemployment benefits also set to expire next month, we don't yet know what effect this will have on the unemployed in industries which are expected to take longer to recover. With many businesses shuttered or working remotely, Class 4 assessed values of commercial industrial are down nearly 12% in fiscal year 2022, fueling an overall drop of nearly $1.7 billion, 5.4% in property taxes, first decline since 1998. Commercial vacancy rates remain high. Despite these challenges, there are some bright spots emerging. We are seeing domestic tourism returning somewhat faster than expected. Hotel occupancy rates, attendance at events, and those dining out continue to climb. Workers returning to offices are expected to exceed 60% by September, an improvement from projections earlier this year. Wall Street, too, has continued to experience strong profitability based on results through June. But unevenness in recovery and uncertainty will cloud forecasts. Questions over the risk COVID variants pose to the economy and overall market performance also remain. The city's budgetary response must be flexible to adapt to this uncertainty. Here, the city will have to do more. For fiscal year 2022, the city has used its unprecedented federal aid and enhanced state education aid to boost spending above $104 billion, adjusted to exclude prepayments. While much of the federal aid is being used for one-time recovery programs and COVID response, more than $1 billion in recurring spending has also been added. The city will need to find a way to fund or end these initiatives by fiscal year 2024, when federal aid drops off. City-funded spending in fiscal year 2022 will grow by 7.9% from fiscal year 2021, excluding deposits into reserves. Reasonable growth of 2.5% will follow after that, but assumes newly funded programs will end. As a result, city budget gaps have declined only slightly since January, averaging about $4 billion annually, even with federal relief and better than projected city revenues. Additional risks remain. My office has set these risks at $1.1 billion in the current fiscal year and about $2.9 billion in each subsequent year before offsets. The largest quantifiable risk remains the expectation of $1 billion in recurring labor savings beginning in fiscal year 2023. The plan also assumes wage increases in the first 2 years of the next round of collective bargaining will be funded with savings from productivity improvements. Both assumptions will need to be agreed upon with the city's municipal unions, or the city will have to find new ways to pay for these costs. Other perennial budget risks, such as overtime, city funding for MTA programs, and education-related risks, despite increased federal and state aid, also remain. To manage, the city should take transparent steps to address future budget gaps through operational initiatives in a way where their gap closing and service delivery effects are made clear to residents. More than half of the savings from the citywide savings program in fiscal year 2021 came from debt management using financing tools. Review of operational demand should take on renewed focus and provide opportunities for new cost savings and revenue enhancements. As gaps are closed, better than projected results may allow the city to set aside additional funds for reserves. And Mayor, I appreciated the priority you have put on rebuilding those reserves. Since April, the city has taken positive steps in this regard, rescinding its planned use of $1.6 billion in the Retiree Health Benefits Trust in fiscal year 2021 and adding $500 million to its Revenue Stabilization Fund. These are very important steps. Despite these actions, however, as the mayor pointed out, the $5.1 billion in reserves, including funds in the health trust, are still less than pre-pandemic levels of $6.1 billion. Reserves will have to grow as spending growth continues, given potential budget risks. Finally, I'd certainly like to commend Mayor de Blasio, City Controller Stringer, the City Council, and their staffs for their efforts and appreciate all of their hard work in the service of the city during these unprecedented and difficult times. And certainly on a personal note, I just want to express what a privilege it's been for these past 8 years to work with Mayor de Blasio and Controller Stringer and with your teams. It really has been a very positive and I hope productive working relationship for us all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Controller DiNapoli. Controller Stringer, do you have any comments on the city's financial plan?
Yes, I do, and I also am pleased to be joined by first Deputy Controller Elena Gilligo and Preston Niblack, our Controller Budget Director, and I'm also, honored to also be here with Mayor de Blasio and Controller DiNapoli, Budget Director Mojica, and the esteemed private members of the Financial Control Board, number 42, the 42nd Controller of New York City, Bill Thompson, Rosanna Rosado, and Steve Cohen. It's an honor to be with you. Last year, I began my remarks by noting that we were traversing perhaps the most challenging budgetary circumstances in the history of the Financial Control Board. Less than 4 months before last year's meeting, the state and city had shut down all non-essential businesses and issued stringent stay-at-home orders in order to fight the COVID-19 pandemic and protect public health. Our economy and our tax revenues were in freefall. Remarkably, here we are just a year later, meeting in person to certify a budget that was balanced thanks to an unprecedented infusion of emergency federal assistance with $5.8 billion more in tax revenues last year than predicted. We will never forget the terrible losses we've suffered. 35,000 of our neighbors and loved ones gone, 900,000 jobs lost, thousands of businesses closed for good. And today, while we have a long road ahead, we are poised for recovery. The New York City of tomorrow will be different from the New York City that existed a year and a half ago. And thanks to the work of President Biden and Majority Leader Schumer, Speaker Pelosi, we have the resources we need to build a reinvigorated, more equitable, dynamic New York City for the future. In fact, studies show that the huge infusions of government aid across the country will cut poverty nearly in half this year from pre-pandemic levels and push the share of Americans in poverty to the lowest level on record. These stimulus funds give us an incredible opportunity to lay the foundation upon which the future will be built. There is much to be commended in the budget and the financial plan. The city, Mayor de Blasio, has strengthened its reserves, putting back $1.6 billion that had planned to withdraw back into the Retiree Health Trust Fund. And this year, the city made the first ever discretionary deposit of $500 million to the new Revenue Stabilization Fund. The budget funds several new or expanded initiatives, such as Universal 3K, investments in classroom resources and mental health supports in our schools, improved services for seniors, and overhead reimbursements for the nonprofits that were on the front lines of the pandemic. I commend the mayor for his vision and commitment in proposing these programs. They will be important in helping to build a more just and equitable city. They represent a promise for the future. But I do want to say that the budget and financial plan that has been put forth has presented leaves me concerned about our ability to keep these promises. In short, we are creating new costs in the future without having figured out how we're going to pay for them at all. Our recovery faces many risks and uncertainties. So, for example, how many office workers will commute into Midtown and Lower Manhattan or downtown Brooklyn every day? When will visitors truly come back to the city for business? How long will Wall Street continue its record earnings run? And most of all, when will the jobs come back for New Yorkers and bring the unemployment rate back down to the historic low we reached before the pandemic? The truth is, none of us here today knows the answers to these questions. Even as we're preparing for this meeting, the Delta variant is changing health protocols, and thank you, Mayor de Blasio, for issuing your own protocols that I think will make a big difference around the country. We have real potential consequences for the pace and opening in the New York City. So I want to make sure that we ensure that our spending is sustainable even when the stimulus funds run out. In normal times, perhaps, it's possible to take a more relaxed view about future budget gaps, because these are not normal times, because we face so many uncertainties. And that's why we have to budget with more certainty. There's too many unknowns in our fiscal outlook. So how are we going to pay for the $1 billion in new programs funded with stimulus when that stimulus funds are gone? And how will we pay for the next round of labor contracts with our city workers? How will we pay for the $93 billion capital program, the biggest program ever? All of these challenges are going to have to be addressed if we're going to have a strong foundation for the future. Now, one of the most important duties, if you would allow me, as controller, has been as custodian and investment advisor to our pension funds. And I'm happy to report to all of you today that our current and future retirees this year, our pension funds earned 25.8% on assets under management. You hear that, Tom DiNapoli? I gave you that right across the middle. 25.8%. And in the last year, we've earned on average 9.1%, well above our target returns of 7%. And this is going to help ensure retirement security for years to come, while helping to ease our future budget pressures. And it has been an honor to work alongside the trustees of the city's retirement system, our labor trustees, and the mayor's office to deliver strong results for pensioners. Now, like the mayor, this is my last FCB meeting. And I want to just say to the mayor, we've disagreed a lot over the last 8 years, and that's the nature of the controller-mayor dynamic that our charter mandates. But I know that you have done an amazing job traversing this pandemic, and every day it has been a real challenge, and I've enjoyed our work together. It has been a privilege of a lifetime to work with many colleagues around the table, and we all believe in one common thought and thread, which is we believe in New York City. Amen. We believe our budget is balanced, and we are very proud to be New Yorkers. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Comptroller Stringer. Now I'm going to call on Michelle McManus. She's Deputy Director at the Financial Control Board, and she'll give her staff comments on the city's financial plan.
Thank you, Budget Director. The release of the fiscal year 2022 adopted budget and fiscal years 21 to 25 June financial plan comes at a time when the city is benefiting from the receipt of multi-year federal aid, strong growth in the personal business income taxes, and the ending of most COVID-related restrictions on individuals, business, and art-related institutions due to the high vaccination rate in the state. In May, Moody's Investor Service and S&P Global Ratings revised their credit outlook on the city general obligation bonds from negative to stable. A booming stock market and low interest rates helped to generate robust profits in the securities industry in calendar year 2020 and for the first quarter of calendar year 21. The widespread availability of vaccines and the subsequent loosening of business restrictions enabled the pickup in sales volume in the city's luxury residential real estate market. The city's fiscal health is showing signs of recovery after facing one of its most challenging periods in recent history. The June financial plan projects more than $6.1 billion of surplus funds in fiscal year 21, which was used to prepay FY22 expenses, helping to balance that year's budget. Over the course of fiscal year 21, the city benefited from additional larger-than-anticipated tax revenues of $5.6 billion, accounting for the majority of the surplus. Based on the pace of tax collections in fiscal year 21 and the momentum from job and wage gains in calendar year 21, the city's plan could be exceeded by $250 million in each of fiscal years 21 and 22 from the property and non-property taxes, excluding audits. The receipt of federal aid enabled the city to direct funds to education and COVID-19 responses, address the economic impact, restore services, and pour billions of dollars into support for citywide programs and initiatives. In the executive budget, the city prudently canceled the withdrawal of $1.6 billion of funds from the Retiree Health Benefits Trust scheduled to occur in fiscal year 21, and increased the general reserve in fiscal year 22 to $300 million from $100 million. In the current plan, the city contributed $500 million to its rainy day fund for fiscal year 22. Unfortunately, the city did not replace the $1 billion of Retiree Health Benefits Trust funds removed in fiscal year 2020. nor did it remove the unspecified labor savings of $1 billion in each of fiscal years 23 to 25 that are unlikely to be achieved. In some respects, the receipt of federal aid has allowed the city to sidestep the difficult fiscal decision of continuing to develop recovering savings through a multi-year program to eliminate the gap. In the executive and adopted budget releases, the city restored a combined $1.4 billion in savings in its agency program without offsetting the restorations with other budget savings. The lack of a substantial commitment to find savings of recurring value and a reliance on federal money that end by 2025 passed the onus to a next administration that will have to address lingering budget issues. In fiscal years 23 to 25, the financial plan assumes total funded spending ranging from approximately $102 billion to $105 billion, with stated budget gaps of more than $4 billion in each of 23 and 25, and a smaller gap of $3.8 billion in fiscal year 24. Based on our risk analysis of the unspecified labor savings and higher than projected spending for uniform services overtime, we estimate the city's budget gaps could be higher by a net $1.2 billion in each of the out years of the financial plan, bringing deficits to $5.2 billion in each of fiscal years 23 and 25 and $5 billion in fiscal years 24. There are additional concerns and potential risks to the operating budget affecting the out years of the plan, which we do not quantify at this time. One of these concerns is the labor contracts that have begun to expire in fiscal year 21. The city eliminated the 1% wage increases from the labor reserve for the first 2 years of future settlements, but has not replenished the funding. Depending on the outcome of negotiations, the potential increase in labor costs would require a greater portion of the city's operating budget. This would be in addition to rapidly growing debt service costs from funding the expansive capital program. In the executive budget, the city released its 10-year capital strategy for fiscal years 22 to 31, totaling a record $134 billion, of which $107 billion will be funded with tax-supported debt. Although the debt burden is projected to remain under 15% of tax revenues that is deemed affordable, the current capital program may not be sustainable in the long term given other future demands on the city's finances. There are other concerns that it could impact the city's budget, including the spread of the Delta variant, especially among the unvaccinated, as well as the amount of vaccine hesitancy in the city and the nation. Another issue is the timing of the revival in the sales volume in leasing and the commercial real estate market. The large amount of vacant office space currently available will be augmented by new construction to be completed within the financial plan period. It is possible that leases up for renewal in the Manhattan office buildings may be for less space than in pre-COVID time, since fewer employees will be working exclusively in the office. Given these concerns and the size of the out-year budget gaps, the city will need to continue developing agency program savings throughout the financial plan period. The programs will have to be larger and contain more recurring savings if the city is going to continue producing large surpluses to close the out-year gaps without service reductions or tax increases. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Director. If we have any comments from the public board members, Mr. Cohen or Secretary Rosado? No. Okay. With that, Mr. Mayor, do you have any comments? Do you want to respond to any of the statements that were made?
Well, just very briefly, I appreciated the analysis, and we take all these issues very seriously. And I think what we're hearing across the whole table is, there's the natural tension, as my friend Scott Stringer said, everyone's supposed to play a different role and is playing it well. But I think where there's unity is we've increased reserves. That has proven to be the ultimate bulwark. We see some very positive signs on revenue, even though we think it's smart to be cautious in our assumptions. We still all see positive signs on revenue and recovery, locally and nationally. The very, very good developments in the last few days. I mean, even as we came into this meeting, the world has changed, and I want to give Scott Stringer credit and his whole team for wise investments, because a lot, we talked about, rightfully, I won't take sides between the two controllers, they've both done a great job, but strong stock market, smart investments, smart choices has put the our retirees in better position, but it also is going to require less in terms of city contribution over several years. That's going to improve our budgetary standings. That's the areas of concern are honest and real, but trying to accent the honest positive too, we just got a great step forward from the comptroller with good news for retirees, but also good news for the city budget for several years to come. And then also the actions being taken in Washington unquestionably will reduce some of our capital needs vis-a-vis infrastructure. We have to go through a process on that. Obviously, some of these are competitive grants, although New York City fares very well historically in federal competitive grant competitions. But to the concern about the capital budget, which again I think is honest, my answer is I do think enhanced capital spending is crucial to recovery. It's also the fact of life in the greatest economic center and greatest city in the world, but also an aging infrastructure city that we must address these needs. But the good news is we believe we'll see some substantial cost offset over the next few years as that infrastructure money comes into play. So that's a good X factor in the equation as well. So definitely more work to be done, but I expect a smooth handoff to the next administration, and a lot of the measures that we've taken can be built upon by the new team.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The role of the Financial Control Board is listed in the statute, and the city must meet 5 conditions in order to not make a recommendation to impose a control period. So with that, I'm going to go back to Deputy Director McManus to make an annual determination if the 5 conditions have been met by New York City.
Thank you. The Financial Emergency Act contains 5 conditions that we review to determine whether or not the city is experiencing fiscal stress. I'd like to go over them now for the board. Number 1, the city shall have incurred a deficit in excess of $100 million in the result of operations. The city has ended fiscal year 2021, subject to the final audit, with a surplus of just over $6.1 billion, which has been used to prepay fiscal year 22.
It's a good one. We're happy about that.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
The scoring at home here.
Okay, number 2, the city shall have failed to pay principal or interest on its notes or bonds when due and payable. 3, the city shall have issued notes in violation of restrictions on short-term borrowing set forth in Section 9B of the Act. 4, the controllers shall have jointly certified that they cannot, on the basis of facts existing at the time of such certification, make the joint certification required to terminate a control period. The city has paid all principal and interest on all its notes and bonds, has not violated any of the short-term borrowing provisions of the FEA. I have also received letters from the state and city controllers informing me that they do not see any likelihood that they would have reason to issue a joint certification relating to market access. 5, the city shall have violated any provision of the Act, and such violation substantially impairs the ability of the city to pay principal or interest on its bonds and notes when due or payable, or the city's ability to adopt or adhere to a balanced operating budget. The city has not violated any provisions of the Act. The staff therefore recommends that the board approve a resolution determining that as of August 3, 2021, none of the events which would have required the imposition of a control period has occurred, nor is there a substantial likelihood or imminence of such occurrence, and that the city is not experiencing fiscal stress that would jeopardize the orderly functioning of the city's fiscal affairs. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any comments on the determination? If not, then the resolution before us is to approve that the city has met all 5 conditions. Do I have a second? First? Second? Okay, then the motion is passed. And with that, I'll make a motion, unless anyone has any further comments, I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting. We have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion.
Seconded. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Picture of efficiency.